this morning is first aid kits. Who am I? I am a homesteader, which is kind of a nice way to say I'm a hippie that's conservative. We have 2.5 acres that we're turning into a little ranchette with a dozen goats and a couple of pigs and chickens and fun things like that. By training, I am a maintenance mechanic. I have been in first aid all my life, ever since being a little Boy Scout. I do industrial first aid for most of the companies I've worked for, which is the guy that keeps you alive for the 30 minutes after an accident until the ambulance can get there to save you. So no serious medical training outside of a couple of first aid classes. We'll get that out. And an awful lot of self-teaching. So, all right, before we get started, a couple of questions. Biggest one, how many here were at my first class like a year ago? 1, 2, 3, a couple of new faces, good. I'm going to be asking questions. You guys can't really answer those because I do give out prizes. How many people here are medical professionals? They make a living off of medical. Fantastic. All right, what else do we have? All right, how many of you keep first aid kits in your cars or around your house? Beautiful. How many of you have actually used your first aid kit in your car in the last year? Last year, wow. For something serious or just Band-Aids? Serious. So I know yours was serious. Yours was pretty good. Generally, most people never get a chance to really use their first aid kits other than the little ice pack for the kid that broke their arm, you know, which is the only time I've ever used my first aid kits. Or occasional bandage. You know, it's very rare anybody that's normally healthy actually hurts themselves to the point to where they need serious medical skills. All right, so has anybody had any major surgeries in the last year? Kind of sort of major, life-threatening? Oh, okay. So semi-life-threatening. Yeah, I had my knee operated on. So what about something simple? Tetanus, stitches, anything like that? Yeah? All right. So you see there is a little bit of a call for first aid supplies. It seems a little bit like an oxymoron today, but I'm going to tell you, pretty much you don't really need a first aid kit. That's kind of a, you know, they talk about the 3 B's in prepping, you know, bullets, beans, and Band-Aids. Make sure you do your bullets and your beans first. Your first aid kit, it probably will come in handy at some point, but it's not going to help you if you starve to death. You know, it's not going to help you if you can't keep what you already have. So as part of this class, I'm going to kind of, how can I say, indoctrinate you to the idea that you don't need a physical first aid kit, that using what you have on hand is probably going to be good enough to get you through most first aid emergencies. Gonna end up kind of getting you on the idea that it's better to have skills than it is to have a first aid kit. So it seems kind of an oxymoron. Here I am teaching a class on first aid kits, and I'm telling you they're really not as important as most people think. Generally, when I do have these topics, there are certain questions people always end up asking me is first, you know, how big of a first aid kit should I have? And as we're finding here with 35, 40 people, not a whole lot of need for a whole lot of first aid supplies. You know, unless somebody gets really, really, really badly hurt, and they lose an arm, they get a really bad laceration, you know, you're really not going to need a whole lot of first aid supplies. You can get away with a couple of Band-Aids. You know, I think most of us here have realized, you know, maybe 3 Band-Aids in the last year. That's as much as you need. All right. People always ask me, do I need IV fluids? And I'm going to tell you, no. You know, how can I say this? There's like trends in first aid. You know, one used to be tourniquets were bad. Now we're starting to learn tourniquets are good. The other one is that IVs were good. Now they're starting to realize that IVs are bad. Generally, people do more damage with an IV than they do good. So if you're in such bad shape that you need an IV, probably not not going to be a whole lot of help to you. And if you go into like 2 or 3 bags with an IV, you start to have a lot of serious issues with chemical imbalances in the blood, things like that. So I do have IVs in my Hail Mary kit. If things get so bad that I need to go to the Hail Mary kit, I would probably do 1 IV fluid. I would not do more than that. In here, there's a formula for rehydration. That's what most medical groups are going to. Instead of using something injected into blood to keep your fluids to a certain level, they actually are teaching people now to give oral rehydration. You know, as long as a person's conscious, it's much better for you. Let your body take care of the chemical balances themselves. World Health Organization in third world countries, they're telling their people don't use IV fluids at all. You know, it's a lot easier just to use the oral rehydration fluids. The other questions I get a lot: do I need antibiotics? There used to be a time when I would tell you no. I'm kind of changing that a little bit, and I am starting to stockpile antibiotics. For those of you that do not know yet, if you need antibiotics, they do sell fish antibiotics on the market, which strangely enough are the exact same dosages and the exact same pills and the exact same quantities you would get from a pharmacy. They just call them fish biotics. And you can get almost everything in a fish biotic. So if you do feel a need to do antibiotics, go online, look for fish antibiotics, bird antibiotics. They're pretty easy to come by, pretty easy to stockpile.
Here's a dumb question. Fish need antibiotics? Is that what it is?
It's one of those weird quirks that there are an awful lot of people out there that think it's a little silly to make it a prescription item. So there are companies.
They're designed for fish?
They are technically designed for fish. I have fish. I've never given them an antibiotic. You know, I've done some ick stuff, but you'll notice the pills are the exact same composition. They have the exact same numbers. They have the exact same formula made by the exact same companies that make all your antibiotics you get through your doctor. I would think it's pretty hard to shove a 250 milligram tablet down a fish's throat, but you know, I don't have fish big enough to do that, so who's to say? But it is a great supply for us. You know, you don't have to, there's 2 ways to do it. You can either go to your doctor and say, hey doc, I'm a prepper, you know, I think the end of the world's coming. Can you give me a couple prescriptions for antibiotics? And some doctors are good about it. You know, as long as you make the promise that you're not going to use them unless things get really bad. It is illegal for you to give those antibiotics to anybody else. You are not a doctor. You cannot prescribe medication for anybody else. It is illegal for me to actually use that IV fluid on somebody else. It is a controlled substance. I am not a doctor. I cannot prescribe IV fluids for anybody. So if I use that on myself, it's legal. If I use antibiotics on myself, it's legal. But I am not a doctor. I cannot prescribe that for somebody else. Antibiotics, if you're going to stockpile them, please do your homework on them. You can do a lot of damage with antibiotics. You can kill off all the good bacteria in the system and maybe not kill off the bad stuff you're trying to kill off if you don't know what you're looking at. So do your homework. You know, every time you buy an antibiotic, put a little sheet with it saying, hey, this is what it's good for, this is what it's not good for. And the third question I get a lot is, you know, what happens if I get shot? So we're going to talk about that in a little while too. You know, there's been a pretty big demand for guns and ammunition, as you have all seen. So gunshots seem to be pretty high on everybody's list of topics lately. So we'll get into that a little bit today. So first aid kits. Why do we have first aid kits? Why are we preppers? You know, that's kind of why we're out here today, is to decide on how to be better preppers. And you know, part of that is to ask yourself, why do I even want to be a prepper? You know, am I ever going to use these skills? And I think I've come to the conclusion that a lot of this is like a safety blanket. You know, you sleep better at night knowing you have the skills to do whatever it is you need to do to survive. First aid kits are kind of in that same group. Do you need one? Not really. Does it help you sleep better at night knowing you have all this stuff? I think it does. I think you feel a lot better, you know, waking up every morning going, you know, if somebody in my family does get really hurt, you know, statistically speaking, they probably won't. But, you know, it's kind of nice knowing that you have all that there to, you know, kind of help them out. So that goes to our next question. There are two types of preppers in this world. There are short-term preppers and there are long-term preppers. So people that are looking at the next snowstorm, that they're going to be housebound for 5 days, short-term prepper. Federal government wants everybody to be a short-term prepper. They have their whole, hey, stockpile 3 days worth of food. They're getting ready to change that to their message is now going to be 7 days worth of food. And then there's long-term preppers that think society is going to collapse and that you need to be self-reliant for 2, 3, 4 years till society comes back. So at some point you got to kind of decide when you're building a first aid kit, what's my end game? You know, what's the worst that's going to happen to me in a week, or what's the worst that's going to happen to me over a 5-year period? Obviously a 5-year period you're going to have a lot more in your Hail Mary kit. You may want to start thinking about suture kits and IV fluids and neck braces and leg braces and everything else. You know, if you're a short-term prepper, you're probably not going to need to worry about that stuff. Okay, so we already talked about the first misconception. Do I really need to have a first aid kit? The reason why I ask that is, you know, like I said, I am an industrial first aid specialist. I did run a group of about 12 people and, you know, trained a group of about 12 people for several years at one of my jobs. And there's a story that I like to throw out. You know, one of my best guys on my team, you know, solid as a rock, you know, really good with first aid. I got a call one day that a security guard had slipped and fell and hit his head and he was bleeding all over the place. So, you know, we run down to the other end of the facility and here's this guy that I thought was my rock. He was the first one on scene. He was just standing there staring at him. And I was like, you know, what's going on here? Why aren't you helping this guy? And he's like, well, you know, I left my first aid kit back there. It's like, well, you're still not helping the guy. Why aren't you helping him? And he like completely froze up because he didn't have his first aid kit with him. You know, he didn't have his gloves with him. Everything I'd ever trained him was, you know, you put on your personal protection gear, you put on your gloves, everything else you need, you know, proper tool for the proper job kind of thing. And I realized that that wasn't necessarily the best way to train people. That in this case, he froze. He didn't have his gear with him, so he didn't do anything. And you're seeing the same story with CPR. For those of you who have done your CPR training, you're now kind of finding it's more of the, what it'd be, the CR, because they're taking out the pulmonary part. Because so many people would come up to an accident scene and go, well, I was taught how to give CPR with a mask. I don't have my mask. I'm not going to do anything. So now the American Heart Association is saying, you know, it's better just to do the chest compressions. You know, teach people how to do the chest compressions. If they want to do the mouth-to-mouth, that's even better for the patient. But we don't want people just stopping at an accident scene going, God, I didn't bring my CPR mask with me. I'm not going to do anything. So that's kind of where we are with the first misconception. Do I need to have a first aid kit? No. You know, it's one of those hats. If somebody's bleeding, take your hat off, use that to stop the blood. You know, you got a t-shirt on, take your t-shirt off, use that to stop the blood. Do you need to have surgical gloves to keep you from getting diseases and stuff like that? Sure, it'd be good if you did, but are you going to let somebody die because you don't have gloves? You know, can you find a plastic bag? Are you in a grocery store where there's plastic bags everywhere? You know, one of those would make not the world's greatest plastic glove, but it'd probably help. So I kind of want you to think about not actually having first aid supplies. Get used to having whatever you have on hand if you're hoping to help people out. All right, so coming into the end of the world. You know, we're all here because we think something bad's going to happen. So at some point when you're designing your first aid kit, you got to ask yourself, you know, how are people going to get sick? How are people going to die when the end of the world comes? And that became somewhat of a fascination of mine. So I started doing an awful lot of research. That just took away my first question. I was going to ask you, what are the top 10 ways that people are going to die when the end of the world happens? This is all data compiled by the World Health Organization. And you're kind of wondering where they got their data. Well, it's an awful lot of countries out there in the world throughout history that have disintegrated. They have gone into civil wars. They have gone into economic collapses. So they have a pretty good stockpile of data on, you know, statistically speaking, how you're going to get sick, how you're going to die. So, going on the top 10 killers, number 1 is lower respiratory tract infection. That's secondary to a lot of things. Plagues, any kind of disease outbreak. Generally, it's not the disease itself that kills you, it's the secondary issues with lower respiratory tract infection or pneumonia. You start building up fluid in your lungs and you tend to die. The other place where this one becomes big is with older people. You know, once you hit like 85, 90, you're on your last couple of legs. Generally, if you die, it's not technically from old age, you're going to die from pneumonia. So, good news of that is, as you notice, the first two, coronary heart disease and lower respiratory tract infection, you know, majority of that coming from people being old, is that when the end of the world happens, you're going to die of old age. You know, a whole lot of things aren't going to change for you that much. Coming down, diarrheal illness. There again, not anything you really want in your first aid kit to help you with that. That's kind of more of a preparation thing of having clean water, clean food. You know, if you have those two taken care of, you know, number 3, not really a big issue for you. HIV AIDS, still killing a lot of people in Africa and Asia. You know, if that's a concern of yours, you know, condoms do great. Stroke, cardiovascular disease, there again, that kind of comes with being old. You know, it's eating too many cheeseburgers, too much salt on your French fries. There again, something you kind of need to prepare for before the end of the world happens. I would almost say that you were dead before the end of the world happened. I mean, your heart damage is already done at this point if you're eating too many cheeseburgers, things like that. COPD, any kind of pulmonary disease, generally caused by smoking, by getting too much dust in your lungs. So there again, that's something you want to prep for before the end of the world. If you're a smoker, give it up. Tuberculosis. Now we're getting into the more communicable diseases. Tuberculosis becomes a huge issue because people go to camps. You know, it's whenever a civilization collapses, there's always good-meaning people that come into that country and say, here, we're going to give you a refugee camp, we're going to give you food, we're going to give you water. What they don't tell you is, hey, we're also going to give you a good breeding ground for tuberculosis and a number of other diseases that could very well kill you. So, secret to that, don't go to the camps. You know, somebody tells you, hey, we're moving everybody to a FEMA camp, just tell them no. You know, I'm happy where I'm at. If you stay in your own house, if you bug out to somewhere nice and quiet, tuberculosis is not going to be an issue unless you bring somebody with you that has tuberculosis. Coming at the bottom, neonatal infections and premature and low birth weight. There again, you know, if you have daughters, don't let them get pregnant. You know, very high death rate if there is not proper medical conditions to bring a baby into this world. Things tend to go bad. In the old days, back when the wagons were traveling through this part of the country, you could pretty much guarantee that about 1 in 10 births would either kill the mother or kill the child. Last one, malaria. In the United States, that was a big issue till 1951, till they started major eradication programs. They're starting to see a pickup of that in third world countries right now because environmentalists are saying it's bad to spray all these toxic chemicals around. They're right, but they're also killing a lot of people because malaria is coming back. So in our case, we don't have a whole lot of mosquitoes in the area. We do get enough for West Nile virus to pop up every once in a while. Would malaria be an issue for us? Probably not. So, you know, you don't really have to concern yourself too much with that. But there again, it's a good preparation. Mosquito nets, bug spray. So out of the top 10, you're really not seeing a whole lot of things that a first aid kit's going to save you from anyways. You know, it's more normal prepping, keeping your water clean, keeping good food supply. I would almost take it one step further, that saying that stress of the situation is what exacerbates most of these things. So prepping is actually going to help you with that quite a bit. You know you have your water, you know you have your food, you're not going to stress out as bad. Probably not going to have a heart attack, you're not going to have a stroke because you're a little bit more relaxed than most people. So then in the bottom right hand corner, they were my guesses if I had to guess what the top 10 killers were in this world. And sadly I found out all my guesses were completely wrong. You know, I figured influenza and plague, things like that, would be a really big issue. You know, not so much. Some of those you could help with antibiotics if you wanted to stockpile antibiotics. Most of those, they're contagious. So there again, don't go to the camps. You do see outbreaks of those from time to time in populated places. You know, stay out of the city, stay out of the camp, stay away from other people, and, you know, not such a big issue. I always thought starvation killed a lot of people. Surprisingly, not so much. It's amazing what people will eat when they're hungry. So, you know, living out here, you'll find rats, you'll find rabbits, you'll find quail, you know, a lot of things you can eat. You can cook up some bark if you're really hungry. You know, you may lose 20, 30 pounds. Probably good for me, you know, because I'm developing kind of a belly there. Next one is death by government. That was one that really surprised me. You know, you see throughout history, you know, the Russians killing off, you know, what was it, 300 million people, and the Germans killing off 6 million Jews, and throughout Asia, you know, Pol Pot wiping out a third of his population. I figured death by government would be a big issue. But in the grand scheme of the statistics, not even a blip. You know, very rarely do you ever see that become an issue. There are random experiences in countries where that was an issue, but in the overall statistics of it all, not such a big thing. And of course, gunshot wounds. You know, it seems like everywhere you go, you see videotape of people shooting, tank shooting, airplane shooting. You think a lot of people would die from gunshot wounds. Very few people actually do. You know, a lot of bullets flying, not a whole lot of people actually getting hit because most people are smart enough to duck. It's just kind of a random thing if you do get hit with a gunshot wound, but we'll get into that a little bit later. All right, so on to first aid kits. Now we've decided that you do want a first aid kit. I'm going to go off camera here a little bit. So we've kind of already decided on, you know, one of the two philosophies, either a quick 5-day kit or a long-term kit. If you're part of a group, you do want to start thinking about who you're going to pick as your medical professional and get them stockpiling things for your group. You'll notice I put everything in ice chests. If you're planning on bugging out, ice chests are phenomenal. You get them dirt cheap at thrift stores and they're rugged. You know, you can keep all your first aid gear in there. It keeps it all climate controlled because heat will destroy your first aid supplies. Freezing temperatures like we saw this morning, if you have antibiotics or IV fluids, very bad for them. What else? We have the Hail Mary kit down below us. The Hail Mary kit is things that you do not have the skills for, that in the event society collapses, there's going to be a rush on the hospitals. They're going to run out of supplies in, I think it's probably like 10 days now. After 9/11, all the hospitals were encouraged to start stockpiling materials. There used to be a time when they'd run out in like 2 or 3 days. Now with federal mandates and federal grants, they are good for about 10 days. So the Hail Mary kit, the philosophy behind that is, hey, I don't know how to suture wounds, but if I have to go and find a doctor and I can hand him the suture kit, he can suture me up. You know, if I have somebody that was shot and they're losing fluids fast, if I find somebody that's a paramedic, I'll hand them the IV and say, here, you know, what can you do with this? Things like neck braces, what else do I have in there? Some medications, things that you wouldn't normally do without a proper medical help, proper doctor's help. Oh boy. What else do we got here? We have the IFAC. What's that?
Do you have a good source for some of this stuff? I mean, is there a favorite place that you'd like to shop for this kind of stuff?
Oh yeah, thrift stores. If you're buying wholesale, you're killing yourself. Neck braces, What else? Just about 80% of my stuff I actually found through thrift stores. You'll find people that have had major illnesses. Either they survived or they didn't. Either way, the family tends to donate all the bandages from that to thrift stores. IV fluids and antibiotics I buy online from a number of companies. The other big question that I had last time was, what about pet kits? You know, things for my animals. And, you know, that was kind of one of the things I laughed at, because a lot of the stuff I buy from veterinary supply stores. The Band-Aids that you use on horses work very good for human beings. They're just a slightly different color. They're just as sterile. They're just as clean. They're made by the same company. As you know, my antibiotics I'm buying through fish companies, you know, bird companies. So you will find it a lot cheaper going through Cal Ranch out of Carson City. They have big stockpiles of injectable penicillin, you know, which doesn't really help a whole lot anymore because everything's pretty much immune to penicillin these days. But they do have a lot of the other wraps and things for doing casting, for wrapping up wounds, larger size bandages and things like that.
I saw they had antibiotics for C. diff, which I thought, well, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Oh, it's expensive, but at least you could just buy it off the shelf there.
Yeah, you can. You can get your syringes, everything else, needles. They've got all sorts of neat stuff down there for veterinarian use.
Where is that, Steve?
Cal Ranch is right down Carson City. Yeah, right off of Highway 50, just as you're coming into town from Reno. It's at some point they are getting Tractor Supply too, which will have a lot of it. I'm not sure if they're open yet or not. I know they were planning on... They're open? Yeah. So they should have a pretty big stockpile. It's been a while since I've been in one, but they're pretty much comparable to Cal Ranch.
Big R out here in Fallon.
Big R in Fallon?
There's a big arm count?
Yeah.
Yes.
Outstanding. A lot of the things, you know, we're going to get here pretty quick into my big 5 things to stockpile. Most of those you can get through Walmart. You know, you don't really have to kill yourself to get a lot of this stuff. And seeing how I threw that one down, I'm going to go ahead and jump into that. You know, if you want to start stockpiling things and you don't have a lot of money, like I said, first of all, take care of your food first, your bullets second, first aid kit. On my list of big 5, you'll notice none of those are traditionally first aid items. They are things that can be used as first aid items, and they're things that can be used for a myriad of other things as well as bartering. So I would tell you, if you wanted to start stockpiling, that's where I would start. Top of the list is cotton sheets. You know, before 1940, nobody really sold bandages. Everybody made their own. They would just take pieces of cotton and cut them into strips and stitch them together, and you know, they're washable, they're reusable, they're easy to sterilize. Sheet like this, thrift store, maybe $2, as long as it's 100% cotton. It's going to do you well. Yeah, I could probably cut, a couple hundred Band-Aids out of that, all of them reusable. So, you know, that just saved me 6-7 boxes of, you know, Band-Aid brand Band-Aids. You can also use them for other things. You know, in the event of a pandemic, you could stitch a couple of layers together, make yourself an N95 mask. You know, you can make triangle bandages for making slings, long strips for tying, you know, braces and things to arms if you end up hurting your arm. You know, it's got myriad of uses, dirt cheap. Duct tape. Anybody that's ever been in industry, 10 times better than a Band-Aid. Band-Aids get wet, they fall off. You know, if you ever meet an electrician on the job, they just take a piece of paper towel, run a couple of things, electrical tape, last all day. You can also cut these into little strips instead of getting sutures and using them as little butterfly enclosures. Here again, great thing for bartering. Use it for restraints. You can use it for repairs. Millions of uses for this. There again, dirt cheap. You know, instead of buying 200 butterfly bandages, you know, roll of duct tape. You know, you can make thousands of butterfly bandages. No matter how bad you get, you'll never use that much duct tape to close that many wounds. Third, moonshine. My all-time favorite. Moonshine, usually about 150 proof. Alcohol, 70% alcohol. For anybody that doesn't drink a lot like me, a proof is just 0.5%. So 150 proof roughly means 75%. The ability to sterilize between these two is equal. They will both sterilize just as quick. They will both do the same job as far as killing bugs and things like that. Chemically, they're very similar. The only difference is don't drink this, it'll make you go blind. This, drink this, good times. Also a great bartering item. Also great in the event of, if you are the first aid responder, to kind of calm your nerves a little bit. I'll take a shot of that. I'll give a shot to the patient. Calms my nerves so I can stitch a little bit better. It takes away their pain a little bit. So, it's you see it in the old Wild West movies, and it works really well. Bleach, another good commodity. $1.50 a jug. Get the unscented kind. You can use it for sterilizing water. You can use it for sterilizing the blankets, the towels, everything else you need. It is wonderful during pandemics and things like that. If you're trying to limit your exposure to various bacteria and viruses, bleach will kill absolutely everything. You can use it for sterilizing wounds. There again, great bartering item. Salt. We're going to get into the rehydration drink here in a little bit. Rehydration fluid is generally what most people would call Pedialyte or Gatorade. It's just a mixture of sugar and salt. A couple other things in there if you wish to add a couple other things. The idea is, like we talked about earlier, it's easier for your body to maintain its own chemistry if you don't force the issue. So if somebody's very dehydrated, if they've lost a lot of fluids, just give them a rehydration fluid, like 1 teaspoon at a time every couple of minutes. Allow them to rebuild their fluids that way. That way their body, keeps the balance for you. You don't have to worry about taking blood tests or chemical panels or anything like that. What else do we have here? What else would I do? Instead of doing first aid kits, I think I would spend the money building knowledge. I would start looking at thrift stores for books on first aid, learn how to do first aid. Like I said, you're much better off having knowledge than having the kit. If you have something in there you've never used before, you're probably going to freeze up in the event of a first aid crisis. You're probably going to end up standing there going, well, okay, I've got this beautiful first aid kit in front of me, but I've never actually used any of it. I've never read a book on how to use any of this stuff. Chances are you're probably not going to do anything. So it's much better to spend your time buying books, going online, buy yourself internet access. Look at World Health Organization. They've got lots of data to give you a pretty good idea of what you're looking forward to when the world comes to an end. Thousands of YouTube videos on how to do sutures, how to put on neck braces. Is it as good as taking a class from somebody one-on-one? Probably not, but just as general knowledge, so you're a little more comfortable with the procedures. Not a bad plan. It's a great place to start anyways. CDC, great website for tracking influenzas and other various diseases, so you know what's coming your direction, so you can prepare for what's coming in your direction. Obviously, if you see that some sort of deadly new H5N6 whatever flu's come in your direction, you can kind of prepare for that. So definitely, before you start working on first aid kits, start working on your knowledge base. Start working on your skill set. Start taking classes. You can take classes through TMCC. They've got a lot of neat classes. Red Cross has a lot of classes. A lot of them are pretty cheap. Coming through our prepper group, we're going to have first aid classes, all great sources of information. What else do we have today? Covered all that. Sorry, my notes are, as you can see, I was a little busy this week. I didn't get a chance to retype all my notes. All right, prevention. As we found with like the top 10 lists, before you start working on a first aid kit, start working on prevention. If you're a smoker, quit. If you're on prescribed medications, start talking to your doctors about, do I really need to be on these? You know, see if he can't wean you off of those. Doctors are kind of funny that way. Once they get you on a prescription, they're very shy about taking you off it. You may not need it anymore. You can start cutting your dosages in half with the doctor watching you. See if you even need to be on those blood thinners and things like that. Chances are you're going to find whatever it was that caused you to go on those in the first place, your body's probably fixed that problem to where you don't need to be on those medications anymore. End of the world happens, your pharmacies, unless you're the first person in line, chances are they're going to run out of whatever it is, so you got 30 days to figure out how to get yourself off of these medications. Start working on getting fit. As we saw, you know, cardiovascular disease, big killer. You know, start exercising, start watching what you eat, start trying to lower your stress level. Most people that do get sick, they get sick because of stress. You know, if you're going to get pneumonia, it's because there's some other stressor out there. So start trying to find ways to relax. With your food preparations, there's always room for foods that relax you, what they call comfort foods. You know, if you like chocolate and chocolate helps you get through stress, hey, stockpile chocolate. You know, when the world goes to shit and you see everything burning out there, you know, if chocolate bar helps you out, great. In my case, it's coffee. You know, I probably have 10 months supply of coffee, you know, things like that that really keep you going. Buy vitamins. Obviously, your diet's going to change radically. You know, no more cheeseburgers for you, no more of the good fast food for you. If you have really good food stockpiles, they'll be really balanced. They'll have lots of vitamins. Once those run out, you're going to find that a lot of the things that are going to affect you are from vitamin deficiencies. Go ahead.
How long will they store?
Vitamins? Well, that's kind of a weird topic. Expiration dates on them will say they're good for a year. I'm going to tell you they're good for 10. It depends an awful lot on how well you store them. Heat is a big killer of anything. Your food preps, everything. There again, I try to keep everything in my garage because my garage stays really cool. It stays about 60 degrees all year long, no matter how hot things get. I always keep things in ice chests because temperature swings are very bad, going from super hot to super cold to super hot to super cold. If you keep everything inside of ice chests or it keeps it moderated, that helps out tremendously. The Air Force did a big study on medications. And you know, every year they stockpile a large supply of medications in the event that we go to war. What they were finding is they would expire in a year or two and they'd have to throw out billions of dollars of medication. So somebody finally decided, hey, let's do a test. Let's see how long these things will store for. And they started using medications that were 8, 9, 10 years old and seeing if they were still effective. And what they found was that most medications will last for 8, 9, 10 years. Vitamins, same thing. They found that solid medications last a lot longer than liquid medications. So if you have liquid penicillin you're hoping to stockpile, probably only good for 2 years, 3 years at most. If you have solid antibiotics in the pill form, probably closer to 10 to 12 years. If you throw them in your freezer, if they're freezable, that'll buy you a lot more time. Liquids, obviously, you don't want to freeze because it destroys the chemical makeup of them. But for pills and things like that, vitamins, if you have room in your freezer, you know, I would say indefinitely. You know, at least 10, 15 years. So then people always ask, well, why do they put expiration dates on that? Well, it's kind of a industrial standard. If you have a product out there, whether it's food, whether it's medicine, whether it's whatever, the federal government requires you to keep a sample of that on hand for however long you think that product is going to be out there. So if you have a food and you tell people it's worth, 15-year shelf life, you're going to have to stockpile a certain amount of that food for 15 years, just in the event something happens and the federal government comes back and knocks on your door and says, hey, people are starting to eat your food, now they're all getting salmonella, we need to check your original stockpile to see if there was salmonella in the original stockpile. So that's why you see such short expiration dates on so many things. The companies don't want to have to stockpile this stuff. It's very expensive for them to stockpile it. So now they say, hey, okay, your sour cream's only good for 4 months. After 4 months, we're not responsible for you anymore. Go ahead.
So with salmonella, would that fall under the heading of the diarrheal illness?
Yes. Yeah, bad food preparation, bad food handling, things like that. So yeah, it's, as my wife will attest, I'll grab sour cream out of the fridge that's 2 years old, I'll still eat it because it still tastes like sour cream, still tastes good. Expired, a year and a half ago. It's not that big of a thing. As long as you keep it cold and you keep it, well sealed. Yeah, it's already soured. Same with yogurt, same with, with a lot of things. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of going by expiration dates. Generally, I double, triple, quadruple the expiration date, depending on if it's a liquid or a solid. Keep on moving. Oh, got sidetracked a little bit. Back when we were talking about first aid kits, one of the bigger things amongst prepper groups now is what's called an IFAK. So I get a lot of people asking questions on that. An IFAK is an individual first aid kit, and it's a slightly different philosophy than a normal first aid kit. The IFAK is something that was picked up from military special forces, and the idea was that each individual person would carry enough first aid supplies to save that individual person. So if you go into combat, some guy gets injured somehow, you would use their individual first aid kit on that person. So whatever they have in their kit, that's what gets used on that person. You never use your own first aid kit to help somebody else. So if they decided to take out all their supplies and not restockpile them, hey, bad day for them. If I get shot, I just used all my first aid kit on that guy and now I'm hurt. Now I'm screwed because I just used my own first aid kit on them. Now I have nothing in mine. Chances are the rest of the team isn't going to give me their kit, unless they know that good things are coming pretty quick. So you'll see an awful lot of chatter online on YouTube about IFAKs. In my case, I do have weapons. That's kind of a personal choice. I am one of those believers that, I have a couple of pigs that a lot of people think are pretty tasty. I have a couple of goats. I have a couple of chickens that lay really tasty eggs. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I keep those, keep somebody from taking them away from me. So I do have firearms to protect all that. Within my IFAK, I do have things for gunshot wounds. Like I said, most people probably not going to have to worry about that. If you're staying in a house somewhere nice and quiet, you're not going out on the street where everybody's shooting, chances of you getting shot pretty slim. People come up to my house because I'm out in the middle of nowhere. I'm pretty much assuming they want to eat my pigs, that there's probably going to be a shooting match. So hence my IFAK is a little more comprehensive than most people. I do have blood stoppers in there. I do have larger bandages in there. I do have tourniquets in there, things that I wouldn't normally, tell people they need for their first aid kits. So there again, that's kind of a personal choice. You have to kind of make that decision. What is my end game? What do I think the end of the world is going to look like? So, a sample of that up here. Generally, they're pretty small. Something small enough you can keep on your belt. The idea is, because it is your own individual first aid kit, you keep it with you all day long, every day, which kind of leads to another question. I get a lot of people asking me, well, what's life going to be like after things go bad? And one thing I've learned is things probably not going to be that much different for you. Even if the economy collapses, everything goes really, really bad. In countries where that has happened before, in Russia in the 80s, in Argentina, late 80s, in Germany before World War II, people still had jobs. 50% of the population still went to work every day. So you'll probably still have your job. Life will probably still be normal if you do lose your job. I'd like to think you're prepared enough to start raising animals, start raising gardens, things like that. Life will become a little more energetic You know, you may have to walk to work instead of driving because gas may be hard to find. You may be toiling in your backyard trying to grow vegetables, so you're going to be living the life of a rancher, you know, pushing plows, towing gardens, things like that. So keep that in mind when you're doing your personal first aid kit. You know, what is my life going to be like? You know, in my case, I'm going to be a rancher, I'm going to be a gardener. I'm going to get lots of blisters, going to get a lot of pulled muscles, you know, a lot of aches and pains, which is, you know, why I keep an awful lot of Everclear on stock. Small bandages, maybe some broken bones if I get really careless. So things for doing casting, probably a good idea. So it all kind of depends on what you think your life is going to be like. You know, if you're living in the city and you're hoping to bug out, and you're hoping to do a lot of hunting, you know, start think of, you know, how am I going to hurt myself hunting? You know, a lot of brush cuts, you know, maybe getting stabbed in the eye by a branch. So eye protection, gloves, things like that. All right, so any big questions on first aid kits? Go ahead.
Hand sanitizer?
Oh, I get lots of that from the dollar store. A lot of things from the dollar store I'm kind of iffy on. You know, they're rubbing alcohol. You get it slightly cheaper there, but it's only like 50% instead of 70%, so you're not getting nearly as much bang for your buck. The Band-Aids you buy there, unless they're a name brand, generally they don't stick, you know. So their hand sanitizer is one of the few things I do buy at dollar stores. I do tend to keep a lot of that on hand.
That's a good thing to kind of sanitize your hands, but is it good for wounds at all?
We'll get into that. I actually have a chart here. We'll talk a little bit about disinfectants and things. That's kind of moving away from first aid kits somewhat, but I do have a chart here. We'll kind of go over that. But it is handy to have around. In my case, I do stockpile a lot of gloves, but if I didn't have a lot of gloves, then, you know, I'd want a lot of hand sanitizer. Not so much to protect the person I'm working on as much to protect myself.
That's what I'm aiming at, yeah.
You know, so it's, yeah, so just kind of keep in mind at the end of the world, small wounds tend to become big wounds if they're not treated. So having a lot of small Band-Aids, probably a good idea. You know, having a 2-in-1 disinfectant. You know, everybody, another one of those trends, it used to be a 3-in-1 antibiotic. Now they're starting to realize the third part of that antibiotic is somewhat toxic. So now everybody's kind of going to a 2-in-1 antibiotic, but we'll get into that in a minute too. So take care of the small stuff, make sure it doesn't become big. You know, take care of your diet, take care of your water, take care of your prep, you know, make sure everybody acts in a safe manner. You know, I must say I was a little bit disappointed when we started that thread about the tomahawk throwing today. I was kind of hoping that somebody would get hurt and we could do first aid, but then we shut down the whole tomahawk thing. So, you know, kind of there, you know, end of the world happens, you know, keep that in mind. You know, don't let people in your group do things that are necessarily dangerous. You know, it's kind of keep a closer tab on your kids. You know, hey, don't climb that tree, you fall and break your arm. I'm the one who's going to be casting it. You're not going to like it. It's going to hurt. You know, there are no doctors for us to go to. So, now while we're on the topic of disinfectants and things, that's kind of one of the other questions I get. Can I use this to disinfect? Can I use that to disinfect? So, kind of a handy-dandy chart. With disinfectants, there's a term called cytotoxicity. And cytotoxicity is a nickel and dime word for saying how well it kills bacteria and viruses and things like that. So the higher you rank on the cytotoxicity side, the faster and the more destructive it is to viruses and bacteria. Also, it's just as destructive to human tissue. So bleach, really good at killing a lot of things and killing a lot of things fast. Would I use it on somebody's wound if I had nothing else? In a heartbeat. You know, I'd water it down to 10-to-1, maybe 20-to-1. It will kill HIV, it'll kill viruses, it'll kill absolutely everything. Really good stuff when it comes to killing things. You know, if I'm working on somebody, I know they have HIV and I get blood on me, I am running to the bleach. I'm going to mix bleach and water, I'm going to hose myself down to make sure I don't get some sort of communicable disease from them. Going down the list, hydrogen peroxide. You know, as children, you know, a lot of our parents used to pour hydrogen peroxide on wounds and it bubble and it's all pretty and stuff like that. There again, pretty high on the cytotoxicity side. It does kill an awful lot of things. There again, it is somewhat destructive to your tissue. So what they're starting to realize is, yeah, it's great. It killed the bacteria that was in your wound, but it also destroyed an awful lot of the flesh. So the wound itself is going to take a lot longer to heal. So you got to kind of keep that into account. Right in there with the hydrogen peroxide, you know, a lot of people remember the mercurochrome as children, nice bright orange color, until they figured out, hey, mercury is really great at killing things, but it also kills humans, pretty toxic. That's why you don't see mercurochrome anymore, but it was wonderful for disinfecting wounds.
So they must have put it in the fish.
What's that?
No place to put the other stuff, so they put it in the fish.
Yeah, they put it in fish. No, you can't even get mercurochrome for fish, sadly, you know, because it's kind of one of those things that, you know, hey, I would probably buy some if I could find some. That stuff worked great as a kid. I'm a little mentally retarded from it, but I'm still alive 50 years later, so, you know, who am I to say that it was a bad thing? It kept me alive this long, and I was a pretty reckless child. Going down the list, alcohol. Pretty good stuff.
The different types of alcohol that you run across, isopropyl, denatured, is there one that's awful for you and one that's not? Or just kind of scale is, where's the scale on that?
Chemically, they're all very similar. Okay. So everything you see on the shelf going to be the same. Denatured alcohol is just a chemical they put into normal wood grain alcohol. What they found out in the 1920s is this stuff is super easy to make, super cheap. Back during Prohibition, a lot of people started drinking this stuff. It gives you a really good buzz, just like Everclear does. But because the chemical makeup is slightly different than a nice grain alcohol, it does make you go blind. So a lot of people were killing themselves or going blind because of it. So denaturing just means that they put a chemical in there that just makes it taste god-awful bad. Keep you from drinking it. Does it do anything first aid-wise? No. Short of keeping you from drinking it, of course. So alcohol content, maybe that's a better way to say it. The higher the content of alcohol, the faster it's going to work, the better it's going to be. So the 50% stuff you get at the dollar store, is it going to work? Yeah, it's just going to take a little bit longer. 70%, pretty good, pretty much a standard. You know, 100% if you can find it, great stuff, but it stings. So, you know, it kind of, you know, don't use it on the kids. Going down the list, we have betadine. I have a lot of betadine. It's, drawing a blank. Iodine, thank you. It's an iodine derivative. I do have other forms of iodine. This stuff is pretty expensive, but they do make veterinarial equivalents of it. That works every bit as good. There again, it works relatively fast, somewhat cytotoxic. You know, they use it for prepping wounds. You don't want to get it in the wound itself. It does destroy tissue, still at a pretty good rate. Going down the list, we have the 2-in-1s. You know, like I said earlier, stay away from the 3-in-1s. Latest trend in medicine, it's also pretty bad on the wound itself. It does cause the wound to take a little bit longer to heal. And then we get into the more holistic stuff. Tea tree oil, honey, silver, colloidal silver, things like that work well. They just take a long time to work. Before the invention of antibiotics, back in the time of Egyptians, back in the 2000 BC, honey was the big antibiotic. When you put honey on a wound, it does a very good job of being a disinfectant. So put that in your first aid kit. Great bartering item, very tasty, great comfort food, and it's a pretty good antibiotic. Later on in history, going into the Civil War and World War I, powdered silver was their big thing. All the Band-Aids would be sprinkled lightly with powdered silver, with the idea the silver would oxide into a colloidal silver or a free radical silver. Does a relatively decent job at killing bacteria and things like that. So that kind of gives you an idea of what can I use, why would I use it, why would I not use it. It all depends on what you have on hand and how much damage you want to do to the wound, or how contagious it is.
Where would you place honey on that chart?
Sorry, honey is kind of an afterthought. It's like down here, somewhere slightly below tea tree. Takes a little bit longer, but it, you know, is not cytotoxic at all, really.
Is there a difference between raw honey and pasteurized honey?
Generally, it's my understanding. I have not done any tests, nor have I seen tests, but most people say the organic honey is better that hasn't been pasteurized. There's still an awful lot of argument as to what is in honey, what is in tea tree oil that makes it effective. You know, what is the mechanism that actually makes it work? You know, could you cook that out of honey? I don't believe you can, but you know, for the sake of argument, I would say stay with the more organic, unpasteurized stuff. You know, there are a lot of places in the Washoe Valley area that do sell raw, you know, organic honey. You know, it's actually cheaper than the stores. The other thing, too, is a lot of the honey suppliers in grocery stores, if you look at their label, it's like half corn syrup. So obviously, it's only going to work half as good. So, any other questions?
Yeah, real quick, what's the tissue damage against alcohol versus, say, hydrogen peroxide?
Hydrogen peroxide is going to be a little bit worse.
How much tissue damage are you looking at, though?
Oh, I'd give it maybe 10% more, 15% more. I mean, it bubbles pretty good. That bubbling, some of that is from bacteria. Most of that is your tissue being burned away.
Okay.
Where's ammonia in that?
Ammonia, I haven't really thought about it. I would probably put ammonia up above hydrogen peroxide because ammonia is really good at disinfecting. And just on that scale, I would have to say it's pretty cytotoxic. But yeah, I haven't actually looked it up.
So I think most hospitals use betadine as their standard, don't they?
They will use betadine to prep tissue and to wash around the edges of tissue, but they are all very cognizant of not getting it in the wound itself.
That's the stuff they put on you just before surgery.
Yeah, it's the stuff that turns you a bright orange. Yeah, they'll swab you down with it pretty good.
Swab it off after they
Yeah, they generally, you know,
cut you, they swab it off because they don't want it to get into the wound.
into the wound. Yeah, and that's kind of the other thing. It's, you know, if I had to put, you know, watered down bleach on somebody, I would put it on for a minute or two and then I'd clean it off. You know, try to mitigate as much of the damage as you can. Try to flush out the wounds with just pure water as much as you can. Try to get rid of as many bacteria as you can naturally, you know, before you go to these kind of things.
What about Hibiclines?
Hibiclines, one of my other favorites, except it's extremely expensive. Hibiclines is a kind of a betadine brother-in-law. Yeah, it works a little bit better than betadine is my understanding, but there again, I haven't actually looked at stats. But it's pretty close to betadine on the scale, I would guess. All right, so let's move into gunshot wounds.
I have one last question on someone talked to me about expiring. That has a fairly quick expiration date. Does that fall under the same heading as the expiration date already that's been mentioned?
It falls on the has it been opened yet or not. As you know, with hydrogen peroxide, it has a natural tendency to break down pretty quick in open air. So if you open it, it's going to become really weak really quick. So if you have a bottle that's sealed and stored, I would think it has a pretty long shelf life.
We should always buy the small bottles.
Yeah, so
open, what are you looking at? Ballpark.
Couple of days. Yeah, well, it depends if you close it again quick and you know how much you used out of it, how much airspace you gotten into it. It's kind of like a soft drink. Okay. You know, you open a soft drink and close it again real quick, that soft drink's going to stay pretty carbonated for quite a while. If you drink half the bottle to where half of the oxygen fills in the bottle, it's going to oxidize really quick and that's going to taste really flat to you. So kind of same thought process.
Okay. Just don't mix the alcohol and the...
Well, that's just, the alcohol seems a little more stable for long periods of time, and the hydrogen peroxide, while it's a little bit better.
Most of the medical trends are saying just stay away from hydrogen peroxide. You know, if you got some, that's great. You know, there are people that'll gargle with it to get rid of gingivitis and things like that. There again, it's pretty hard on the gums, but it does get rid of the gingivitis. Okay. So, I mean, it does have its purposes, but if you got it, great. It's cheap, you know, so in that respect, Are there better options? Yeah, you know, if you've got lots of money, go with the betadine, go with the Hiboclins, you know, go with the 2-in-1 antibiotics, that kind of stuff.
You're going to get the value of one of these wonderful electric juices.
Yeah.
You know, I'm going to go home and throw my bottle of hydrogen peroxide away.
Well, don't do that. I mean,
about
it's
6 months and it's been opened a couple of times.
yeah. Hydrogen peroxide's easy to test. I mean, next time you cut yourself, pour some on a wound. If it bubbles, then you know it's still good. If it doesn't bubble, then hey, throw it away.
Okay, that's
You know, feed it to your plants.
So real quick, what does the term cytotoxic mean?
Cytotoxic is how toxic it is to the human cell, well, to any cell. So how quickly will it kill cell tissue, whether that be a virus or a bacteria or a skin cell or tissue cell. So yeah, obviously the higher on the cytotoxicity level, the more destructive it is to flesh and to bacteria and things like that. All right, so we ready to move on to gunshot wounds? How am I doing on time?
You're good.
You're fantastic.
Okay, great. Because yeah, I'm kind of sleep deprived, so I can ramble for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. All right, so the other big question, gunshot wounds. Generally, when things go bad and people do get shot, it is a rarity. We've already talked about that. If you do get shot, you got like 72% chance of getting shot in extremity. Not necessarily life-threatening. It may modify your way of life. If you are one of the unlucky few that are in that 20-some-odd% that gets hit in the torso, either in the stomach, in the chest, in the head, things are looking bad for you. Starting back in the Civil War, if you got shot in the chest, actually here, let me move this over a little bit. You pretty much had a 62% chance of dying. That was back when bullets were moving really slow. The reason why so many people did die, even though the bullets were moving so slow, is because they tend to introduce an awful lot of foreign material into the wound itself. It would go through your shirt and take all sorts of contaminated material with it into the wounds. Chest wounds, a little bit lower than abdominal wounds. There again, with abdominal wounds, you tend to tear open stomach cavity, the intestines, the stomach itself. Tends to add an awful lot of bacteria and foreign elements into the body, which tends to be somewhat deadly. So you'll kind of notice that trend on the two charts. If you get shot, you're better off getting shot in the chest. Assuming you don't get hit in the heart, you're less likely to die statistically. That's not going to work.
Another good use for bleach.
Yeah, another good use for bleach. Yeah, that's why I wanted an early class, because I knew wind was going to be detrimental to my talk here. Going into World War I, bullets started speeding up, getting a lot more dangerous. But we started to understand a little bit about infections, about medical care. World War I, you saw a big increase in medically trained people on the battlefield, closer to the battlefield. So death rates went down a little bit. Going into World War II, they plummeted for several reasons. One, after World War I, we had the Geneva Convention. Everybody said, hey, war is hell, war is horrible. Let's make some rules to make it a little more civilized. They made it illegal to have bullets that expand. You could not have hollow point bullets. They made it illegal to dip those bullets in feces, in chemicals, in anything that might cause you a higher death rate from infections. They also started to kind of tinker with antibiotics and things like that. So death rate plummeted quite a bit. There again, you start seeing more training within the military. You know, the soldiers going into World War II, just about every soldier had at least a little bit of first aid training. So it helped out quite a bit. Going into Vietnam, things plummeted quite a bit. We started seeing the MASH units, the forward surgical units. You started seeing more and more highly trained medical staff going out with the units. You started seeing helicopters, fast evacuations to better hospitals, just better science in general. They also started seeing the beginning of ballistic protection. Using of Kevlar started in World War II, and nylons and things like that to slow down bullets, to make them a little less dangerous. Going into Iraq, things got fantastic. You got shot in the chest or the abdomen, you know, very few people actually died. You know, you could get onto a evac helicopter so quick. You had the blood clotting agents, tourniquets started coming back into favor, highly trained medical people, great antibiotics, you know, things started looking really good. So, coming into all that, you know, what is the end of the world going to look like if you get shot? We're going to start to skyrocket back up. You know, you will not have a helicopter at your disposal. You get shot, nobody's going to come help you. If you're fortunate and you have a doctor or medical trained professional in your group, you know, things not looking as bad, but still pretty bad. If you don't have the antibiotics, if you don't have the ballistic Kevlar, that kind of stuff, yeah, you're going to start to skyrocket really, really, really bad. Hence the reason why, you know, I preach heavily, if you are thinking of having a gun as part of your group, you already spent $700, $800, $900 on your weapon. You might want to spend $200 on Kevlar. You know, you can find this stuff on Craigslist. The straight up stuff for handgun, the class 3 stuff that'll stop most handgun rounds, you're looking probably $200, $250 for. A lot cheaper than what you paid for your gun. Going with the ex-military stuff with the trauma plates that will stop most rifle rounds, you know, it could be up to $1,000 depending on the condition. But there again, you've already spent $700, $800 on your gun. It's kind of worth it. You know, this is going to cost me a lot less than how much first aid supplies it's going to take to keep me alive if I do get shot in the chest and the abdomen. You know, it takes an insane amount of first aid supplies to keep somebody alive once they've been shot in the chest or abdomen. So, sitting on my little soapbox here, if you haven't bought ballistic Kevlar, you might want to think about it if you have a gun in your collection. So, coming back to our chart, the big trend right now with firearms is, hey, I'm going to get myself an AR-15 and I'm going to stockpile huge piles of military surplus, 223 rounds, 5.56 rounds. That's good for me. It's bad for you. The 223 was never meant to kill people. It was actually designed as a bullet to wound. What they learned in World War II is all the Congressional Medal of Honor winners, there was this history there, 80% of their unit got wiped out, they were all dead. Guy goes crazy, grabs a machine gun, starts killing 40, 50 enemy. You know, the military started looking at that going, wow, we don't want that to happen. We don't want to be killing our enemy and have one of them get courageous. So in their infinite wisdom, they decided to build a round that would wound people. And the philosophy was, if you have somebody next to you that's screaming in pain because they got wounded, it's going to mess with you emotionally. 2, now you have to have 2 people grab a stretcher, take that guy off the battlefield. You have to have a huge amount of medical supplies because he's still alive. A dead person doesn't need any medical supplies. So now you have to worry about logistics with a lot of medical supplies. You have to have more doctors. You know, you have to have an awful lot more infrastructure in order to help a wounded person. So the military just decided, hey, we're not going to kill the enemy. We're just going to wound them badly. And hopefully the war will be over before they heal and before they come back really, really pissed off at us. So if you're using military surplus ammunition, by Geneva Convention, it cannot be hollow point, it cannot expand. Chances are it's going to go right through the person you're shooting at. They found that out in Afghanistan and Iraq. A lot of the soldiers would shoot the bad guys would get back up and start shooting back again. A lot of the soldiers got really frustrated. They started buying their own higher power weapons, 308s, you know, larger caliber rifles, in order to shoot people and actually keep them down to where they didn't have to worry about getting shot back. If you use non-military ammunition, things are better for you. If you're using ballistic tip, things that are meant to expand, the 223 will do a lot more damage. It will cause a lot more tissue damage. It will cause a lot more loss of blood. There again, you know, if you're planning on shooting at somebody, you better hope they have a gun, because if civilization ever recovers, there may be liability there. Let's say things just get bad for a couple of days and you shoot your next door neighbor because you think he's stealing your chickens. If in 6 weeks society comes back, you now have a liability issue. You know, hey, it's coming in. Okay. I highly recommend to people, obviously, to use higher caliber rounds and buy bulletproof vests. Bullets. What to expect with a gunshot wound. There's two ways that bullets do damage. One is if it fragments out, you have lots of sharp pieces that are going to cut veins and arteries, things like that. You're going to cause lots of loss of blood. Very slow way to die. A lot of people shoot deer, then they have to chase the deer for quite a while if they don't hit a vital organ, just because, you know, you ultimately you're waiting for that animal to die. What they found with a lot of the higher end ammunitions, you know, what they call like Trauma Max and things like that, is something called hydrostatic shock. So instead of having the bullet hit tissue and expand out and start cutting, they actually keep the bullet intact. They just have the bullet flatten out, and it creates a shock wave that goes through the body. So if that shock wave happens to hit an organ, if it's a softer organ, kidney, spleen, things like that, it'll explode that organ. If it hits the heart, it'll stop the heart. So you hit anywhere in the chest and that shock wave hits the heart, it will cause the heart to go into shock and stop functioning. So if you're hoping to stop somebody first bullet, go with a bigger, heavier bullet that has more hydrostatic shock. What else is there to know about gunshot wounds? Generally, most people teach if you do get shot, you tend to do a lot more damage trying to pull the fragments out, so leave the fragments in. Like I said, if it does expand out into nice sharp razor fragments, if you try to pull that razor fragment out, you most likely will do more damage. You will run the risk of cutting an artery or a vein coming out. So the current thought process is, you know, if you do get shot, if you can, leave the bullet in. Just keep it, you know, as well dressed as you can. Allow it to drain as best you can. Yeah, like I said, have a lot of first aid supplies on hand.
One thing about the body armor is there are some companies being caught now selling fake armor. So if you're going to buy some, make sure it's a reputable dealer and supplier.
Absolutely.
They just caught a guy in Florida selling
cheap ceramic and...
yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be expensive. There is a YouTube video of a company out of San Francisco that sells 4x8 sheets of ballistic paneling. The idea was they were selling it to the government for embassies and things like that for blast protection, but there are some YouTube videos where guys cut it into little chest-shaped pieces, and then they'll take it out and shoot it with .223s and, you know, every kind of caliber you can think of, and it is pretty solid stuff, and I think it's only like $200 for a 4x8 sheet, so you could easily make panels if you wanted to make panels. You know, they would be flat, so they'd be somewhat uncomfortable, but, you know, if that's all you can afford, or if you want to get together with half a dozen people and, you know, for, what, 20, 30 bucks, everybody gets a little 10 by 12 sheet, you know.
Good would harden up the house.
Yeah, you know, it's relatively light, and, you know, like I said, that's what that was for embassies overseas, for blast protection. You could easily put it inside of car panels if you want to try to up-armor your vehicle a little bit. It is a lot lighter than steel, a lot more effective than steel. I do not remember, but I think you could probably find it on YouTube pretty quick. And
Take it to a machine shop and have them throw it just a little bit to make it a lot more comfortable.
yeah, yeah.
I see it advertised as SAPI, Small Arms Protective Insert.
Yeah, that's an actual professional company that does make ceramic plates. It's kind of like Saran Wrap. It used to be a company was named Saran Wrap, but now we call any piece of clear plastic Saran Wrap just because it's the way we are. So, you know, that's an option. Anything you can do to keep yourself from getting shot, you know, do it. You know, my wife has no first aid skills. I'm going to put the bulletproof vest on her and hide behind her as we're shooting at each other because she gets shot. You know, I can save her because I've got better skills than her. But generally the idea is just, God, try not to get shot. Getting shot's a bad thing. Very good way to, you know, get yourself killed. It is a rarity. If you go looking for it, you know, chances are it's going to find you. You know, he who lives by the sword, die by the sword mentality. So keep that in mind. If you've got a gun and you're going to go after somebody with a gun, there is that chance you will get shot, and it's a bad thing. So you might want to start thinking about either really good training, go with somebody that's going to teach you how to hide behind stuff that bullets don't go through, or, start up armoring, start getting Kevlar, start getting the trauma plates, things like that. So any questions on gunshot wounds?
Sucking chest wound.
Sucking chest wound. Darn it. I knew you were going to say that. There are lots of really good videos on YouTube. Sucking chest wound is where the lung itself or slightly below the lung itself has been penetrated. So as the diaphragm pulls up and down, it will suck air into it, into the chest cavity, and you start to build up air pockets inside of the chest cavity to where you can no longer breathe. So it's not that hard to fix that. There are lots of great YouTube videos. It is probably one of the procedures, even with my limited skills. If I knew somebody was dying, I would give it a pretty good go. A lot of people use simple things like saran wrap and a little bit of Vaseline to make a one-way valve so that as the chest is expanding and that air in that little air pocket goes out of the bullet wound or hole, it cannot suck back in because the one-way valve will close over the wound and keep that from happening. Good idea to have a stockpile of large gauge needles. If that wound does close up to where that air cannot escape and that air pocket is kept in there to where you cannot get a full breath of air, it's a good idea to have a large gauge needle to be able to puncture that air pocket to get that air pocket to relieve itself. So did you have a specific question on sucking chest wounds, or
Just how to treat it.
just how to treat it?
The flap, the...
Yeah, generally it's pretty straightforward. With, like we were saying, if the person was shot with military surplus 223, that bullet went all the way through. Always remember that. Always look for a hole on the back. You can cover the one on the front because people always look down the front of the body for wounds. Very few people are trained well enough to where they actually roll a body over and start looking at the back. You just, for whatever human nature, you just assume people are always injured on the front. So look for holes on the back. You plug the hole on the front, they could still very well be sucking in air from the back. So you may have to put two valves on them, or at least plug one hole on the back and put a one-way valve on the front.
There are like first aid kits for those.
There are, and you can buy those on the internet.
It's so common in a combat situation.
Yeah. You can get absolutely anything you want on the internet. I have bought nice little surgical kits that have, 6 different scalpels and every forceps, every clamp, every tweezer you can possibly think of, if you want to go the easy route. So, yeah, you can definitely find just about anything you want on the internet if you want to get crazy with it. Look like you have a question, or just thinking? Nope. Okay. Any other questions? All right, well, I'm going to take my Everclear and open bar and back for all those who want to.
Thank you, Steve.
Certainly.